Vrindai Hai Tulside Pyai Priyai Keshavashacha Vishnu Bhakti Prade Devi Satchavachai Namo Namaha Vrindai Hai Tulside Vyai Priyai Keshavashacha Vishnu Bhakti Prade Devi Satchavachai Namo Namaha. Jai Tulsi Maharani ki jai. Okay, cartels. Thank you. All right. Hare Krishna. It's on. Yeah. Okay. Oh, you turned it off? Okay. Now it's on. It's on, the mic's on. Hey, Krishna. Okay. Jai Radha Madhava Kunya Bihari Malabar Gilivana Rade Gopi Jana Vallabha Gopi Jana Vallabha Gilivana Rade Gopi Jana Vallabha Sodanandana Rajajanandana Sodanandana Rajajanandana Gunatera Vanachare Namonatera Vanashade Dairat Umadava Punyabihare
Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Paravatikacharya Sutala Satashi Shimad, His Divine Grace Abhaya Charanana Bhaktivedanta Goswami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai, Namacharya Shridhara Thakur Ki Jai, Rem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shidwaita Gadadha Shivasati Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai, Shri Shri Radhakrishna Gopi Gopinath Sai Kunda Radhakunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai, Vrindavanam Ki Jai, Maturanam Ki Jai, Jagannath Swami Ki Jai, Yamunamaya Ki Jai, Shrimati Lassi Devi Ki Jai, Samveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai, Gaur Premananda Hari Hari. All glorious the assembled devotees, all glorious the assembled devotees, all glorious the assembled devotees, all glorious to Shri Guru and Gauranga Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Gaur Premananda. Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Chinamani Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharane Nivashesha Shunyavadi Paschacha Deja Tarane. Let's see. I think it's just one person. So, okay. So, we're continuing with our reading of the Srimad Bhagavatam. First canto, 12th chapter, text 27 is the next text in the series. So, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. 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 Okay. Takshakad Atmano Mrityum Dvija Putro Pasarjitat Prapatsyata Upatshutya Mukta Sangha Padam Hare Takshakaratmano Mrityum Dvija Putro Pasarjitat Prapatsyata Upashrutya Mukta Sangha Padam Hare Takshakaratmano Mrityum Dvija Putro Pasarjitat Prapatsyata Upashrutya Mukta Sangha Padang Hare.
Mukta Sangha Padam Hare.
Takshakarat Madho Mrityum.
Takshakaratmano mrityum.
Dvija Putro Pasarjatat.
Nijaputro prasaditat.
Prapatsyata Upatshutya.
Prapasyatya upasutya.
Mukta Sangha Padang Hare.
Mukta Sangha Padam Hare.
Okay.
साक्षादात्मनो मृत्युं
Takshakaratmano mrityum.
द्विजपुत्रोपसाजितात्
Nijaputro prasaditat.
प्रपत्स्यात्य उपाश्रुत्या
Prapasyatya upasutya.
मुक्तसङ्गं पदां हरे
Mukta Sangha Padam Hare.
तक्षकात् आत्मनो मृत्युं
Takshakaratmano mrityum.
द्विजपुत्रोपसर्जितात्
Nijaputro prasaditat.
प्रपत्स्यत उपश्रुत्य
Prapasyatya upasutya.
मुक्तसङ्गपदं हरे
Mukta Sangha Padam Hare.
तक्षकादात्मनो मृत्युं
Takshakaratmano mrityum.
द्विजपुत्रोपसार्जिता
Nijaputro prasaditat.
प्रपतस्यता उपाश्रुत्य
Prapasyatya upasutya.
मुक्तसङ्गपदं हरे
Mukta Sangha Padam Hare.
Okay, ladies.
Takshakadatmano mrityum.
Takshakaratmano mrityum.
Dvijaputro prasajita.
Nijaputro prasaditat.
Prapatsatya upashrutya.
Prapasyatya upasutya.
Mukta sangha padam hare.
Mukta Sangha Padam Hare.
Takshakadatmano mrityum
Takshakaratmano mrityum.
Dvijaputropasarjita
Dvijaputro prasaditat.
Prapatasyata upashutya
Prapasyatya upasutya.
Mukta sangha padam hare
Mukta Sangha Padam Hare.
Okay. Takshakat by the snake bird. Atmana of his personal self. Mrityum, death. Dvijaputra, the son of a Brahmana. Upasarjatat, being sent by. Prapatsyate, having taken shelter of. Upashrutya, after hearing. Mukta Sangha, freed from all attachment. Padam, position. Hare, of the Lord. Translation: after hearing about his death, which will be caused by the bite of a snake bird sent by a son of a Brahmana, he will get himself freed from all material attachment and surrender unto the personality of Godhead, taking shelter of him. So purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Material attachment and taking shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord go ill together. Material attachment means ignorance of transcendental happiness under the shelter of the Lord. Devotional service of the Lord while existing in the material world is a way to practice one's transcendental relation with the Lord, and when it is matured, one gets completely free from all material attachment and becomes competent to go back home, back to Godhead. Maharaja Parikshit, being especially attached to the Lord from the beginning of his body in the womb of his mother, was continuously under the shelter of the Lord. And the so-called warning of his death within 7 days from the date of the curse by the Brahman's son was a boon to him, to enable him to prepare himself to go back home, back to Godhead. Since he was always protected by the Lord, he could have avoided the effect of such a curse by the grace of the Lord. But he did not take such undue advantage for nothing. Rather, he made the best use of a bad bargain. For 7 days continuously, he heard Shrimad Bhagavatam from the right source, and thus he got shelter at the lotus feet of the Lord by that opportunity. So again, Takshakadat manam mrityum dvijaputro pasarachitat prapatsyata patshutyo mukta sangha vadang hare. So Om Ganat Timadanda Shah Gananjana Shakya Chakshur Meditan Yena Tasmai Shigurave Namaha. So before talking about the main topic here, I want to get a little history about Takshaka, the snake bird, because he has a whole history with the Pandus, and the history is told in the Mahabharata, the great literature by Srila Vyasadeva. So the history is as follows. When the Pandavas were given their half of the kingdom, they were not actually given the nice half of the kingdom. They were given Indraprasth, which was basically a desert and a forest. There were two things. There was a dense forest that was inhabited by all these snakes, including Takshaka and his family. Takshaka, his wife, and the little babies. Yeah, they also had children. And also to living entities. So that's all there was there. So basically, the poor Pandavas, they were just given this useless place, basically. And not only were they given a useless place, but the Kuras were thinking, when they go there, they're going to be killed by the snakes. You know. And so they went there, and of course, Krishna was there too. So one of the first things that happened is that Agni Dev approached them, and Agni Dev said, I need some Ayurvedic medicine. And so the Ayurvedic medicine was in the forest. It's called the Kandava forest at that point. And I have to eat the forest. You know, when you're Agni, you've got to take a lot of herbs to overcome some sort of disease. And the reason he had his disease, he was sick, because there was this emperor, Marut, who had performed a fire sacrifice for something like 12, 14 years or something. And he was pouring ghee in the fire continually. Now, ghee is nice, but 14 years of drinking ghee can definitely do wonders on your liver. Even one day of eating fried food does wonders on the liver. You know what the liver is? Good. You need the liver. If without the liver, you die. It's absolutely essential for your health because you can't digest anything, any fats or anything like that. So, anyway, most people have toxic livers from eating too many fried foods. So he had a toxic liver. So he thought, I need all this Ayurvedic medicine. All right, fine. So I need to devour the forest. But the problem is, several different problems, is that Takshaka was in there. Well, that wasn't such a big problem, but he was being protected by his good old buddy, Indra. That was a big problem. So basically every time that Agni tried to eat the forest, Indra would just rain down. And, you know, he couldn't eat it. You know, he wasn't into raw food. Like me. So anyway, he wasn't into raw food. He wanted to have food that he could digest, you know, cooked food. In fact, he wanted to cook the food that he was eating, which is even better. Like if the person eating can cook it simultaneously to his eating, that's Agni. It's interesting. So he asked the help of Arjuna and Krishna. And Arjuna and Krishna agreed, and so they said, let's start the forest on fire. So Agni did it, and he started the forest on fire, and Indra comes, and he tries to put out the fire with his rain, and Arjuna makes this like arrow thing with the circles overhead so the rain can't hit the forest. And so at the same time, with Takshaka, the interesting thing about Takshaka was mentioned here, he wasn't there in the forest. But his wife and kids were there. That is the important point. And wow. So his wife and kids, to make a long story short, they get burnt up in the forest fire because basically they weren't allowed any entities to leave. There were actually two little birds that were allowed to leave. That's another story in the Mahabharata. But other than that, all the living entities had to be fried. And of course, then you also had Mayasura, who was living in the forest. Mayadanava, actually. Mayadanava is sort of like the architect of the demons. He was living in the forest. And he came out, took shelter of Krishna and Arjuna. And later on, that's why the palace at Kandavaprasth was actually built by Mayadanava. Not by Vishwakarma, the movie's wrong. But by Mayadanava, he built the palace, and that was a palace where water appeared to be like land, and land appeared to be like water, and that's where Duryodhana made his big mistake of walking into the water, and Draupadi laughing at him, and him becoming even more upset, wanting to take away Kandavaprasth from the Pandavas. So anyway, so the point is that Takshaka's family was killed, and Takshaka had this great animosity towards the Pandavas, and he was determined later on to kill one of the Pandavas. So this feeds into the story of Parikshit Maharaj being killed by Takshaka. So anyway, getting back to the point here, is that Parikshit Maharaj, we all know the story in the Bhagavatam, that Parikshit Maharaj was just, I guess, doing his hunting. Hunting's allowed for Kshatriyas, and that's a question some people have. Why or did Kshatriyas eat meat? And the answer is generally yes. And they ate meat of the animals, the meat of the animals that they killed in the forest by hunting, like, unfortunately, the deer. It's not that I like it so much, but this is what Kshatriyas did. So you may say, well, they're killing animals in the forest. Well, they have to do that to practice their martial arts, first of all. And second of all, they actually accrue karma by doing that. It's described also in the Mahabharata that every Kshatriya has to see hell after he leaves the body. And that's why the Kshatriyas also had to perform all these different sacrifices, like the Ashwamedha sacrifice, to sort of get rid of the karma that they have to do. They have to do it, but somehow are they getting a reaction for it. Sometimes you see that in so many stories that someone gets karma, but it was obligatory for them to do that activity that they got karma with. It's like you're caught between a rock and a hard place. Just like the story when Indra had to kill that demon Vritrasura, he was ordered to do so by the demigods and by Lord Vishnu, and he killed the demon, but still he had to suffer the reaction. Amazing, isn't it? It's almost like the guru giving initiation, you know. He's been ordered to do it, but he still has to suffer the reaction. Unless he's expert enough to touch everybody's head afterwards and give them back their So anyway, so sometimes you're just doing stuff, and of course Krishna protects you ultimately, I understand. And it's, as far as Indra and killing Vritrasura, was a pastime of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So Kshatriyas have to suffer a reaction for that activity, even though it's allowed, and they have to ultimately give it up, too, because at the end of life, the Kshatriyas, they don't take sannyas, but they go to the forest, and they renounce and they perform austerities for that particular purpose. Whereas the Brahmanas, of course, are always in the forest, or in the cities, which are like a forest, and they're always preaching, so there's no reaction for brahminical activities like that. But it's a fact, when you're dealing in this material world, there's all sorts of things you've got to do. And these things sometimes are a little entangling, contaminating, or you get, some sort of token reaction for it. So it's, of course, chanting, you get rid of your karma. I understand that. But, sometimes things happen. Anyway, so Parikshit Maharaj was out hunting. And as he was hunting, he developed a great thirst. And why did he develop a thirst? I mean, he's a devotee. He shouldn't be controlled by thirst. But he developed a thirst because he was under the Yogamaya potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And under that Yogamaya potency, the Lord wanted him to be cursed. So he went into this Samika Rishi's ashram thinking, I need some water. Samika Rishi is absorbed completely in samadhi in the Lord's pastimes. And he wants water, but Samika Rishi is just like absorbed. And so Parikshit Maharaj gets so upset that he walks out, and in the meantime, when he walks out, he puts a snake around Samika Rishi's neck. So Samika Rishi's son, when he heard about this, he cursed Samika Rishi's son. When he heard about this, he cursed Parikshit Maharaj to die within 7 days from the bite of the snake bird. Shringi was the son's name. So Parikshit Maharaj was feeling so repentant that he had done this act before he heard about the curse. He thought, he was praying to the Lord, I want to get the reaction immediately. I deserve it. I want to be punished for what I did. So when he got the news, Samika Rishi sent one of his servants to inform the king. When he got the news, he welcomed the news. He thought, this is great. Now I know when I'm going to die. So most of us don't know when we're going to die. And sometimes it happens at moments where we're not even aware, we're sleeping or someone's driving the car. That's why when people drive the car and I'm sitting in the passenger seat, they always hear me go, Hare Krishna, in different times. They're wondering, are you all right, Maharaj? No, your driving's not all right. Whenever I see anything that's dangerous, I go, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. And of course in Fiji, I'm saying that a lot. Because there's a lot of danger in Fiji. Like at night, we're on the road, and people are just like walking, crossing the street, dressed completely in black. Like you're dressed in black. So you can imagine, and the Fijian people, they're darker skinned anyway, they're dressed in black. They just like fade into the darkness, basically. And they don't take precautions, so it's going, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. So anyway, so we don't know when we're going to pass away, but Parikshit Maharaj knew. And that's considered a benediction. Even that story of Maharaj Kakvanga, he was fighting for the demigods, and they offered him a benediction. Anything you want, we'll give you. He said, I just want to know when I'm going to die. And they said, any second now. So he came down to the earth planet, took shelter of Krishna, went back to home, back to Godhead. So Parikshit Maharaj had a similar approach. Now it's time for me to leave my body. Okay, let's prepare. And the best way to prepare, of course, is Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smarana, hearing and chanting about the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because Parikshit Maharaj was so determined, he could give up eating, sleeping, drinking, and everything for 7 days. Great determination. So anyway, so that's the story. So Prabhupada here talks about material attachments. Interesting in the purport, how one has to give up material attachment because material attachment is the opposite actually of taking shelter in the lotus feet of the Lord. It's actually the very opposite. So that's a big problem for us because we have this material attachment. I mean, we're attached to different things, our tongue, whatever, or a car. And just like yesterday, we were driving a nice car. I was attached to it, and then we had to come back in a car that wasn't so nice. It was nice, but not as nice. I was disappointed. Depressed, disappointed, discouraged, disgusted, so many D words. And today we got to perform more austerities because I'm not going to be in that same car. But anyway, and even the devotees know that I like the car, still they've arranged another car. So, and they're so surrendered, they make me Gurudev, you gotta go this card. Anyway, I'm just joking. So, so the point, we have so many attachments to different things, little attachments like that. And any of those attachments will keep us in the material world. Anything, any little thing, even attached to driving around in a certain type of car, or attached to one's watch, like that, or anything, attached to one's hair or lack of hair.
I guess it would be to the kids as well, right?
What's that?
With the kids.
Yeah, with the kids. Yeah, attachment to your kids. Attachment. So what do we do about it? The question is, what do we do about all this? I mean, if you had to list all of our attachments, I don't think that you'd have a computer system that could keep up with all the different attachments, from A to Z. All these different things, isn't it? Your clothes, even I'm attached to my socks. So sometimes devotees want to take my socks, after they and switch with their socks. No, but you're not going to take my socks away from me. So all these different attachments are there. So what do you do about it? Well, there's an easy solution, and I'm not talking about just like going to the forest and walking around naked like sannyasis are supposed to do. Actually, in the Vedic literature, it says sannyasis should just dress with the wind. With the wind means nothing. It wouldn't work too well nowadays. And Vanaprastha, at least a little better, he wears tree bark. That's what Lord Ram was wearing when he was actually out in the forest. Clothes made of tree bark. It wasn't actually the tree bark, but they would stitch together clothes from the fabric made from tree bark. Which is really rough and it hurts. Not hurts, it itches or something like that when you wear it. So, no, it's not that we need to perform more austerities. Okay, so I'm attached to my lanka or whatever. Or some of you don't know what that is because you're from India. But anyway, so it's not that I have to give up the things that I'm attached to, but I have to use them in Krishna's service. Because the very same thing, sometimes the example of a thorn is given, that, if you have a thorn in you, and if you go to Vrindavan, there's so many thorns, really big ones. They actually go through your shoes and everything. And fortunately, Navadvi got me some special shoes, his remnants, so I was able to be all right with the thorns this year. So then you take out a thorn with another thorn. So what does that mean exactly for us? That means if we're attached to something, we offer it to Krishna. We use it in Krishna's service. So you're attached to your car, you use it in service, Krishna's service. So that's Brahmarpanam Brahmahavir Brahmagno Brahmanahutam Brahmatena Gantavyam Brahma Karma Samadhinam, which is really interesting. It's a famous verse, Gita, which means if you give something or make a contribution, Prabhupada translated that as you make a full contribution to Brahman, then the offering becomes Brahman. The person making the offering becomes Brahman. Brahman means spiritualized in this particular case. Not that you merge and you become the Brahmajyoti or something, but it becomes spiritualized. And then basically by using that thing in Krishna's service, then that thing becomes a source of your liberation or Krishna consciousness rather than a source of your entanglement. Because you want to understand to whom it belongs. Again, there's that verse, Ishabhasham idam sarvam jat kincha jagajam jagat tena chiktena bunjidha margurhad kashasvidram. Everything is owned and controlled by the Supreme Lord, and everybody's giving his quota to utilize in the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that frees us from the attachments. All right. So you got a family, children you mentioned. So engage them in Krishna consciousness. But how do you engage them in Krishna consciousness is the question. Because you're thinking they're like your car, you can control them. If your car doesn't work properly, you send it to the mechanic. So if your children don't work properly, you send them to their uncle or something like that. That's probably the Vedic system, that the uncle was meant for chastising. It doesn't work like that. You know, the children don't work like cars. They have independent, of course, cars nowadays have some independent. Isn't it? You know, thinks independently for itself. That's one problem with the Tesla. It has its mind of its own. So anyway, so the point is how to use everything in Krishna's service. Not simply that everything should be used in Krishna's service, but there's a methodology. We were talking about this yesterday. And with children, it basically means showing a good example, being kind, and letting them voluntarily choose Krishna consciousness rather than involuntary. You know, just like everybody should make their own choices, including the children. They're living entities. And some of them may choose not to. That's all right. You still love them. And that's the key. And you're supposed to even love people who are demoniac, not just your children, but everybody. You know, yastu sarvani bhutani atmane vanapashati sarva bhuteshu chatmanam tatodhya vigigupshate. That's it. Another important verse from the Upanishad. That we see everyone connected with Krishna. So in this way, we can actually be attached to everybody. Because we want them to be Krishna conscious, we have some love for them, we'll engage them in Krishna consciousness in whatever way possible. And our attachments therefore become spiritualized. They're not material anymore. Because we're using things properly in Krishna's service and we're protecting, like Prabhupada. When he was managing the movement, he was protecting Krishna's money, for example. Prabhupada was so strict in India that he even arranged that he had to sign every single check. Even if he was somewhere else in India, they had to mail the check to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada had to sign it. You may say, well, that's really attachment to money. But he saw his belonging to Krishna. And he was protecting Krishna's resources. So in that way, we can actually utilize our attachments to give up the attachments. Because attachment is all right with the right purpose. You understand? But the wrong purpose is we're attached to someone or something to give us enjoyment. So it's the enjoying propensity that has to be given up, not the external object of the attachment. I mean, I remember in the early days of the movement, the brahmacharis would blame their attachment to women or girls. There are no women in the movement, there's all girls. They blame it on the girls. You know, it's like blaming your attachment to food on the food. You know, that it's the pizza's fault I'm attached to it. That stupid pizza, you know. Why is it attracting me like that? No, you fool. You're the one who's at fault, not the pizza. So, yeah, so it's not the sense objects that are the fault. It's your fault because you don't want to use them in Krishna's service. Like you know, this romantic thing, it means you want to use the other person in your own service to satisfy your senses. You want to use your children to satisfy your senses. Oh, make us proud. Become a doctor or a lawyer or something prominent. Don't drive a taxi. Your mother will be embarrassed. Don't join the Hare Krishna movement. Your mother will die. That's what I heard. Your mother's dying because you joined the Hare Krishna movement. You know, so be attached to doing the right thing with them. You don't own anything. Nirmana moha chitta sanga dosha, as from the 15th chapter of the Gita. Nirmana moha chitta sanga dosha. You know, this is the method of getting out of the material world. Nirmana, which also means humility, but nothing is mine, means two different things. Like amanina, manadena, which is nirmana is the same thing. You know, amanina means give up the attachment or give up the false prestige. Nirmana moha, give up illusion. Ajita sanga dosha, give up bad association. Avyamanicha vinivrita kama. And give up this kama. Don't give up the objects of sense gratification. Give up the kama, the lust for the objects. Be enthusiastic. And the solution is to be enthusiastic and sort of lusty to give Krishna pleasure. Isn't it? We want to give Krishna pleasure. Enthusiasm, lolyam, which Rupa Goswami describes as the price of pure devotional service. Okay, so you don't have to worry about giving up attachments. But be attached in the right way, that's all. Simple. It's simple. Yeah, I'm attached to people, but I'm attached to them being Krishna conscious. And if they don't become Krishna conscious, or people leave Krishna conscious, it causes me pain. But if they don't become doctors or lawyers, I don't feel any pain. Isn't it? Good to me, or whatever. But if they remain chanting their rounds, I'm very happy, just like a proud parent. So same thing. Attachment is there, but for the right reason. So any questions or comments? Yes. Actually, Keshav.
So you know how you were talking about how Kshatriyas always accumulate karma and they're always like
Well,
after.
yeah, when they're just by their activity of
Yeah.
killing the.
What about military personnel nowadays?
That's interesting. Well, it depends on what sort of war they're fighting.
Yeah.
Whether whether it's a just war or unjust war or protecting, Prabhupada did say when, someone's in the military, it's their duty to follow the orders of their superior. However, if the orders of the superior are adharmic, then in the sense that it's an unjust situation, then they don't have to follow. Just like in World War II, the Nazis, many of the Nazis had the defense that we were just following orders. And that defense didn't work in the courts in Nuremberg. They still had to go to jail or wherever they went. So just following orders, if someone tells you to take a particular race or religion and put them in concentration camps and kill them, that order you don't follow. So there are wars that are fought for the right, even material purposes, and there's wars that are fought for the wrong purposes. And so those wars that are fought for the wrong purposes, the soldier would, of course, they get court-martialed or something like that. The soldier probably should leave the country before he gets court-martialed. I mean, it's a difficult situation because you find this happening in the world today. I'm not going to comment on it, particularly on certain countries where people are asked to do things that they know are wrong. But, so, you have a question?
What if you don't know? Like, you just don't have the information, you have been fed one kind of information, and that's all you know.
You do the best according to the information you have. I mean, Krishna's not going to punish you because you just don't have access to the right information. I mean, it's a tricky thing. It's a very tricky thing. We had devotees who were in Iraq and Afghanistan, in the military, and they were never told that, what you're doing is adharmic or anything like that. Somehow or other, and one has a duty to one's country too. Of course, the duty to Krishna supersedes that particular duty, so one has to balance these things. I think in each individual case, one has to examine and balance the pros and cons. It's an interesting question, but Kshatriyas definitely have to kill. Nowadays, I don't think they get trained up by hunting. No, the army doesn't get trained up by hunting. They get trained up anyway. They have these mock wars and everything. So, okay.
In this translation, it says that Parikshit Maharaj, he let go after hearing about his death, and then he let go his material attachments, and then became surrendered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But I thought, isn't it like Parikshit Maharaj was a pure devotee anyway, and he was liberated? It says then he will get liberated.
Yeah, but sometimes in this material world, one starts to get attached to things. There's the story of Priyavrata is similar to that, right? You know that story? That Priyavrata, I mean, it's an interesting story that he was a pure devotee from the beginning, and he never wanted to take up the kingdom or get married. And his guru was Narada Muni. And Narada Muni was thinking, boy, I got my disciple liberated. So, so what happened is that Narada Muni got overwritten by his guru, Lord Brahma, and said, you know, there's no one else to take over the kingdom with Priyavrata. So Priyavrata took over the kingdom. And he, you know, basically developed some attachment. I mean, that happens. I mean, obviously, they're not deep attachments. It's just like when you're dealing with things on a daily basis, you do tend to get attached to things in this world.
Surrender to Supreme Personality of Godhead means no.
What's that?
Surrender to Supreme Personality of Godhead means like no attachments.
It means basically, at a certain point, it's just like you're going, so even you can't be attached to the things you're using in Krishna's service at that point, because you can't take them with you. You can't take your disciples with you, or that would be funny. So you can't be like, what is it, Savitri and Satyavan. That Savitri followed Satyavan. That's an interesting story. All the ladies should be like that. Ready to follow Yamaraj to bring their husband back. It's a famous story. So, yeah, at that point one has to give up even the things you're using in Krishna service and just take shelter of the holy names and hearing the chanting. That's true. That's true. So really, he didn't really have material attachments, but there are certain I wouldn't consider them material, but he was attached to things he was using in Krishna's service. I mean, he was attached, for example, to keeping his kingdom free from the influence of Kali. I mean, certainly, you have to be attached to passionate about certain things, don't you, in this world? But he had to realize that that service was no longer his when he was leaving the world. And that service was given to, and he did it in a responsible way. It was given to his son, Maharaj Janamejaya. So, yeah, so we're attached to certain aspects of our service, which are not exactly material, but sometimes the word material is used, but they're actually external attachments for Krishna. So at a certain point, like you leave in your body, you have a will, and you have to give these things up. So, yeah, so when it mentions material attachments, it wasn't like attachments to enjoying those things, but attachment to using those things in Krishna's service. It's a good question, actually, based upon the translation here. Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah, Ikana.
When you go to store and buy something, that money, it might go to a, say, convenience store. The money you give for stuff, it goes to that person. What happens if they spend that on meat or gambling?
It's a problem for them, not for you, because if you're using that thing in Krishna's service, anything you do in this world involves some connection with something that's karmic. Just breathing, you know what happens when you breathe? There's so many little tiny creatures that are getting killed. That's why the Jain religion, they wear this mask on their face, not because of COVID, but because they want to breathe in the creatures. But it doesn't work like that. Some creatures are so small, they go through even a N95 mask. So, and also every time you start the car, you're incinerating, you're cremating so many microscopic creatures. Wow. Imagine that. Oop. So, anything you do in this world, there's some connection with some bad thing. It's just natural. So if you go to the supermarket or, like you said, the convenience store, then the guy who makes the money from the convenience store is going to go out and, buy liquor or something like that, do something really wild. Or even at the convenience store, they probably sell beer there too, right? So therefore, anything you do, just like if you're a taxi, let's say you work as a taxi driver, some devotees work as taxi drivers in Fiji, then everything you do, you're transporting people with meat. Or if you're, what's big if you're a bus driver, we have some devotees who are bus drivers too, here and also in Fiji. And so you're transporting meat. What can you do? So if you give the results, your own personal results to Krishna, Krishna will protect you. But you can't, there's no way to not be involved in some harmful practice that will harm certain living entities, because you can't stop breathing. So you have to just take up Krishna. Like Prabhupada said, if you eat vegetables, even if you're a vegetarian, it's sinful. Because you're acting, if you don't offer to Krishna. So you're harming the poor little broccoli. You should have compassion for the broccoli. You like broccoli, right? You said you did. So each broccoli is a living entity. And you're taking the poor broccoli's life. And it's screaming in pain. You don't hear it. When you cut it, okay. You get the point. So you got to stop breathing, stop eating, stop moving, stop going in cars. What else do you have to stop?
How can you go in cars you can't move though?
You can go in a car without moving, yeah. That's okay. But don't slam the door. So, you can't get away from it. Every action you do is harming other living entities in this world. But if you're Krishna conscious, then aham tvam sarvapapebhyo mokshayashyami masu chahat. Krishna says, don't worry. So any other questions? Yes?
What is a snake bird?
A snake bird is a snake with wings on it. I haven't really seen any, except in the movies. But it's some sort of snake that flies. And, I have no idea what it looks like. But it does fly. Do we have snakes? There might be creatures here, a snake that fly. I know there's squirrels that fly.
Yeah.
One time we were, when we first started our project in the United States, I was cutting down a tree, I was using a chainsaw, and the squirrels started flying through the air. But I've never seen a snake.
It's like a dragonfly, but then bigger, like a snake.
Yeah, but snake is a different species than a dragonfly.
Yeah, it's like an animal.
Snake is a completely different species. I'm sure there are snake birds somewhere. So, what other questions do we have? Yes?
Maharaj, you were explaining about every living entity has independence, they have the freedom
Right.
to choose, right? Like, since we have been in this moment, like, when we go out, we see people from different cultures, right? Like different religions, and also they come from different, probably sampradayas as well. Like,
Yeah.
maybe they are following Shankaras or they're
Yeah.
Buddhists. So, what do you suggest, like, to develop that kind of a frame of mind where we don't belittle the other sampradayas, at the same time be
Yeah.
continuously like improving in our sadhana? So what tips or what?
Yeah, how do we deal with other bona fide sampradayas? Obviously, we shouldn't criticize them, but objectively, we can establish how Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's presentation of Achintya Veda Veda Tapa, especially with the four sampradayas, is the culmination, rather than opposed to what the four sampradayas teach. It actually is the culmination of the teachings of Ramanujacharya and Bharkacharya, Vishnu Swami. You understand? And Madhvacharya, of course. You can actually see how there's different aspects of the absolute truth, the tattvas, revealed by these four sampradaya acharyas, and how it culminates, ends in Lord Chaitanya's presentation. So there are different steps. Like we don't denigrate the process of yoga. We even talk about it, Patanjali, Yam, Niyam, Asana, Pranayam, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, and Samadhi. We say that's a step on what probably term the yoga ladder. And Krishna, of course, in the Gita says, Yogi Dhamma Pi Sarvesham Madgatenanta Ratmada. So this is the way we present it. And we can approach Shankaracharya the same way. Or Buddhism. For example, I often use the tenets of Buddhism to present Krishna consciousness. Because, the Four Noble Truths. What? Material world is suffering. Yeah, we believe the same thing. Suffering is due to attachment. Second noble truth. Third noble truth, give up the attachment, the suffering goes away. And the fourth is, there's an eightfold path of right thinking, right living, etc., like that. And so we have no problem with that, with Buddha's original teachings. There's some problems we may have with other people's interpretation or variations of Buddhism. But Buddha's original teachings are basically very much consistent. Buddha himself never decried the existence of God, never criticized the existence of God. There's one famous sermon, which is called the Sermon at Deer Park. I don't know if you know what Buddhism. And it's called the Sermon of No Soul, but if you read it, it never says that there's no soul or no God. So Buddha is teaching something very preliminary to Krishna consciousness. And we appreciate that. So I think it's a question of appreciating what people do. Of course, when you're talking about left-handed tantra, we really can't appreciate that, where people drink out of a skull and things like that. Tantric stuff, that we can criticize. But I think any process that has been taught by a avatar or someone who's empowered, we can appreciate it as a step toward, and you can objectively compare. Right now in our GBC meetings, we're talking about coming up with a dashamula for ISKCON. The dashamula means the 10 basic philosophical points of ISKCON. And basically, we can appreciate, in these 10 points, we're appreciating what the other acharyas have taught, and we're showing that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teaching of Achintya Beta Beta Tattva is so complete objectively that nothing else can hold a candle to it. It's an objective thing. Anyone who looks at our philosophy and compares it to others doesn't negate the other philosophies, but sees it's the topmost understanding, most precise philosophical definition of God and God's energies. So that's an objective thing. And so I think when we're talking philosophically, it's just, we have objective evidence. Is that all right?
Sure.
So, one other question that we have to ask. Yes?
Gurudev, is addiction next level of the attachment, or
Addiction is what? Well, I guess that's severe attachment. Obsessive compulsive behavior. OCD. Isn't it? So, how do you give up addiction? You get addicted to chanting and other things like that. How do you give up eating meat? You can become attached to prasadam. That was Prabhupada's system. Devotees used to call themselves prasadam addicts in the early days of the movement. And Prabhupada had that, he wanted to addict us. So one of the ways he addicted us to prasadam is he cooked everything in ghee, which people don't do nowadays. And ghee is so tasty that one will never forget the taste of it. I remember the taste of the first pakora I took fried in ghee. Not in motor oil, like you all do nowadays. 10W40. I know you don't use motor oil. But, there's no comparison. I remember that, the taste is still there, and, just like cemented in my little taste buds in my brain from the very beginning. So Prabhupada addicted us, prasadam. And it was such an addiction that in the beginning days we would all eat so much we had to lie down after eating and groan. I mean, Prabhupada was expert in that. We'd lie down after the Sunday feast and say, "Oh, I've overdosed on prasadam." And the devotees would say, "Lie on your left side, not your right side, because your liver is on your right side." So I just remember all the boys lying, the brahmacharis lying on the stairs, like, because it was so tasty. It was so tasty, you just couldn't stop. People would have glubjaman eating contests. And on Balaram's appearance day, they would have honey drinking contests. You ever seen that happen?
Not the contest, but yeah, we have Varuni in Oxford.
Yeah, Varuni beverage. So, Prabhupada had this whole concept of addicting us to things, nice things. And of course, after a while, one has to reduce their eating, or else they die at an early age. But yes, we want to addict people to chanting. One should be addicted to chanting. One should be addicted to hearing, rising early in the morning. It should just be part of one's life. We need people, not obsessive, of course. Obsessive compulsive is a different thing. Someone just picks up the bead bag and all day long. That's compulsive behavior. Or he wants us to be clean, but not obsessive. Not clean in a obsessive way, like Lady Macbeth in Shakespeare. Lady Macbeth in Shakespeare? No, Shakespeare. Lady Macbeth. Anyway, they had killed someone, and she was feeling guilty because there was blood on her hands, and she could never wash the blood off. She could wash the blood off, but she kept seeing the blood like that. So that's obsession, compulsion, or hand washing. Some people have this compulsive behavior so much that they keep washing their hands, the skin starts coming off. So we don't want people like that. Just whoever asks them a question, they just say Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. We want people to be practical. Okay, we should end now because we have some programs. What was it? Honey drinking. Someone remembers the honey drinking in Miami when we used to do that. Oh, someone said on the internet they figured out what a snakebird was. It's like a pterodactyl.
Yeah, I googled it.
You know what a pterodactyl is? Pterodactyl. It's one of those flying dinosaur things that would pick up different creatures and eat them or something. Or anyway, a flying whatever dragon.